Welcome to Fashion Designers Get Paid, a podcast for burnt out fashion designers who want to ditch the toxic rat race, say bye-bye to backstabbing bosses, and work with brands who value and respect them. I'm your host, Heidi, and I believe that you can do things differently in your fashion career. Because the truth is, most industry jobs will underpay and overwork you, and having your own brand is far from profitable. Let's also be honest, most of them fail. So if you actually want to, be a fashion designer and get paid, the best way to do it is as a freelancer. Now, maybe you've been told that brands don't accept remote freelancers, or that freelancing means being an exploited temp employee working full-time without benefits. Or to work freelance, you have to be a rock star expert with all the skills from design through development. I'm going to show you that it is possible to be a real freelancer in fashion, work remotely with brands you love, and make money, even if you're terrified you don't have all the answers. You got this, and I'm here to help you do it. In this episode, I'm chatting with Ted Griffith, who started his fashion brand, Sexy Ted, as a one-person show. After getting burned by a factory, he realized he needed help. So he hired a freelance fashion designer. Massive shout out to my fast grad, Crystal Lewis, who is the freelancer that Ted raves about throughout this whole episode. He hired a freelance pattern maker and more. Ted shares his experience working with freelancers, both the good and the bad. And there were two things that he highlighted as essential for any good freelancer. First is communication, and second is presenting yourself as a problem solver, a solution. As we talked about in depth, you're not just providing a tech pack with specs and construction costs and fabric details. You're providing a solution to the brand, helping them make sure that the idea in their head is what they actually get from the factory. Ted also explained how he connected with his freelance fashion designer, Crystal, through the freight forwarder company, Silk. Dear listener, this is a great strategy that you can use to connect with other companies in the industry who can essentially funnel clients to you. You're going to love this episode. Let's get to it. Ted, welcome. Please let everybody know who you are and what you do in fashion.
Sure. Well, thanks first of all for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So I am, I guess, a accidental fashion entrepreneur. My prior experience before starting a clothing line was wearing clothes.
Okay.
So that was a very broad, deep background that really didn't help me a whole lot starting off. Hence why I had to end up hiring freelancers. My brand is really around athletic wear, predominantly for people who play racket sports. My background is playing squash, and I travel around the country doing that. And a lot of the clubs that I play at have somewhat restrictive dress codes, usually predominantly white or all white or some variation thereof of that. Kind of old school clubs.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff was kind of we had a blue shirt with a pattern, let's just make it white, and there you go. And that's kind of all you got. And so
Yeah.
I was like, we can do a little better. And I had sold my previous business in the environmental space, and I was like, you know what, I want to do something that makes me happy and at least have a new challenge. And so I decided to start the brand Sexy Ted. And so the nickname is something that I'd already had for, it's coming up now on a decade. And that's
I read the backstory on your site.
Yeah, people have been calling me that for a long time, and I already naturally travel and people seem to like me. So I was like, well, if I can just make the stuff, maybe there's a market. And I figured at worst, you know what, I will be my own best customer because I need this stuff anyways. So that is kind of how we got started. That was the end of 2021.
Okay, I was going to ask. So we're recording now in middle of 2023. So it's been like a year and a half only.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Absolutely. And so it's something where, I'm personally funding and backing it. And so it's definitely, a bootstrapped affair.
Yeah.
This is not a, millions of dollars of VC money behind it. And so it's been a learning curve and trying to sort of dip my toe in and find people who are willing to work with a smaller entrepreneur. You're looking at the entire company and then some. So it's been, a godsend to find people like Crystal and others who have been able to help augment my team and really teach and help me grow from my very limited knowledge base.
Yeah. Okay. So you work with Crystal Lewis, who's one of my students in my Freelance Accelerator program. She's phenomenal. As I said earlier, she's spoken very highly of you. Talk to us a little bit about like that whole process of finding those first freelancers or like getting things off the ground to begin with. What did that look like? Where were you at?
Yeah. So kind of like I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
Some could argue I'm still, I'm less blind, but still sort of blind.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of it was kind of luck initially. So before I even got to Crystal, I was, you know, having a chat with a friend about, hey, I'm launching this clothing line. And so he actually connected me with a factory owner who happened to live in Atlanta.
Oh,
They had a
okay.
factory in Mexico. And so that's where I initially started. And it's
Okay.
a little bit different, you know, they, she would basically help me kind of design stuff, but there weren't really tech packs. It's kind of like, hey, bring in this shirt, tell me what you want. And
Yeah.
they would go make that. And so initially that kind of, that worked for me. But eventually, you know, there were issues around some of the timing and, you know, quantity and scale that broke down. So then fast forward to a different friend at another time, I was talking to them about, well, I have this and, you know, I'm trying to figure out how to get different products. And they mentioned a company called Silk. And for those who aren't familiar, so Silk is a group of people out of the company Flexport, a big freight forwarder. And so they do two really valuable things for me, which I think for those listening would probably be valuable for you and or your clients. So one, they handle all the logistics of getting stuff from one side of the world to the other side of the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that certainly is important. That is a little bit more of a commodity, but what they also do is they do factory inspections, so pre, inline, and post inspections, and in a way that's affordable.
Mm-hmm.
Through them, initially they were going to offer a service around doing product design, and they were the ones who actually introduced me to Crystal to begin with. So it's kind of
Yes.
a convoluted way of getting there. They've since decided they don't want to do product design, so they send a lot of people to Crystal or other people
Yeah.
like her.
Yeah.
So I guess one takeaway, you know, for those listening would be, you know, it's not just about trying to find the me's of the world. It's
Yeah.
who else might refer you to me because
Yes.
they don't want to do this work or they're not capable or it's not their business, but they need people. Like Silk
Yeah.
doesn't want me to have no idea and talk to a factory they work with and waste their time. They want
Right.
Crystal or whoever to
Yeah.
go and shepherd that process and make it less painful for everybody. So
I love this insight so much. I talk frequently about like where can you create a funnel, right? Again, like don't not just looking directly for you, the individual brand, but like connecting with factories, connecting with freight forwarders. That's a great one I hadn't thought of that are then like they're the kind of the middleman, right? With talking to all these brand owners and then they can funnel you those clients. That's brilliant. I love it.
well, and I think it also is easier because if someone comes directly to me, I don't know them. They're not, I can try to research them, but I may
Mm-hmm.
not be looking for anybody. Maybe I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you find someone who can refer you, now
Mm-hmm.
someone's already said something good about you, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
probably going to be a lot more receptive to talking and hearing
Yeah.
about what you can offer. And I
Yeah.
think from a, you know, at my heart, you know, I'm a salesperson. And so how do you sell yourself? Well, it's even better if someone else does the work for you and then you just got to
Totally.
close the deal.
Yeah. And you're in a position, like you said, instead of someone reaching out blindly to you, which people do and does work, but working with Silk, the freight forwarder, they then are introducing you to the freelancer in a time when you actually need it. So not only is the freelancer then validated by that introduction, the timing is right, which is a challenge when you're trying to find the work, right? So, okay, so you met Crystal through that connection. Have you gotten other freelancers through them as well?
So not directly through Silk, but through Crystal, there's a couple of other folks she works with, who like a pattern maker and, you know, who's also in Dallas. And so, you know, from time to time, we'll get samples shipped to Dallas. I'll fly out there. We'll get
Mm,
Crystal, the pattern maker, together and go
okay.
review it.
Yeah.
You know, I have gone and used Maker Row before,
Oh, Maker's Row. Yeah. Okay.
and I've had kind of limited success, and maybe that's because I was going about it the wrong way. You know, I
Yeah.
think, you know, for someone who doesn't understand fashion and has never been in that world at all, just kind of has an idea and wants to figure it out, like what is a tech pack? Why is a tech pack important?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, if you start trying to look for factories as an entrepreneur, that logically makes sense. They're going to make it, but you're really skipping the step of finding these freelancers who can help actually make sure what you want is what you get. And so,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I deliberately wore the shirt that I'm wearing, not because it's just part of my brand and part of my style, but it's
Yeah.
also it's an illustration of that. So I tried to work with a factory that was actually local here in Atlanta,
Okay.
and they make they make athletic shirts and stuff. And so I
Okay.
figured this isn't really hard. Let's change the
Yeah.
placket, let's change the collar stand. And,
Yeah.
I guess it's, let's see, it's flipped on here, but so they didn't have a tech pack.
Yeah.
Again, they make these shirts. It should be simple, right?
There's not much, we're not looking at like a really
Right.
complex draped garment or something. Yeah.
No, but and so, I am a guy. This is a women's
The
cover.
placket's going the wrong direction.
It's backwards.
Yeah.
The fabric is inside out. There's just a
Wait,
bunch of,
what?
yeah, that one. I
Oh
was like,
my God.
is there any common sense? Apparently not. So,
Oh my gosh, that's wild to me.
right.
I
And
mean, it
so,
is and it isn't, but it's, gosh, that's tough.
but I think it was a combination of me, having that experience, but then, another, I guess, compliment to Crystal and tip to others is that, you know, for those like me who don't have any experience, right, or very limited experience, or maybe they
Yeah.
were just a buyer, they were never producing.
Yeah.
I think you need to be able to educate your own customer to the value that you're bringing. Like I 100% now get why like Crystal is a rock star in these tech packs, and they're super detailed, and there's no confusion. There's like, I'm not going to say it's impossible, knock on wood, to misinterpret, but it'd be
Sure.
pretty darn hard to do that.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that, like, I thought, I mean, it's a shirt, right? Like it can't be that hard. And
Totally.
so I think, when she kind of walked me through the process and explained it to me, that made worlds more sense, and also made it easier for me to know, okay, here's the information you need out of me so that Crystal can be
Yeah.
successful.
Yeah. I love that because a lot of people, a lot of freelancers who are kind of first starting out, they're like, oh, why would somebody pay me like X dollars for a tech pack, let's say? And if you approach a brand like yourself who's new, you're like, I've heard tech pack, but like, what is it actually? Like, what does it actually entail? And they just kind of come at you blindly with a price. You're like, why am I paying X dollars for that? Right. But the educational component is so valuable to not only convey like what it is that you're getting, but also why it's important. And you had the experience of things going wrong already. Like you kind of felt that firsthand, which is unfortunate, but like a hard lesson learned. So yeah, that educational component is really valuable. I appreciate you pointing that out. Okay, so it sounds like you've worked almost exclusively with Crystal and then freelancers that you've gotten connected through her.
Correct. And some of my other resources are less fashion specific. They
Okay,
are freelancers, but
sure.
on
Yeah,
the
you can share
graphic
about those.
design. Yeah, so there's a woman who I've known for, gosh, over a decade,
Okay.
and her name's Katie DiGiovanna. She does wonderful work. She's a one-woman shop, and she's just super talented. She came up with the Rhino logo. Oops, there's
Other side, yeah, yeah.
yeah, I had to think
Did she do
backwards
like all
there.
the comic art on your site too?
She did a good bit of that, and then
Okay.
the other part that wasn't her, there's a web design company up in Louisville called Honeywick.
Okay.
A buddy of mine, Jeff, runs, and they have been awesome. And in theory, again, Shopify is a simple thing, right? But getting it actually like set up correctly is maybe a slightly different thing. And they
Yeah.
have resources on graphic design and like illustration, and then just doing the layout. So,
Yeah.
it definitely takes a village. And in theory, I might be able to do a good bit of this, but the reason why I want to pay someone back to, like, why would someone pay me to do a tech pack, is because
Yeah.
it's not my value add.
Yeah.
It's not what I'm going to be good at. I know what it should look like, but I
Yeah.
don't know how to format, whichever, if it's an Excel or whatever.
Sure.
And I need to be going and making connections with like country clubs that I might be selling to. I
Yeah.
don't need to be trying to figure out like, okay, where exactly should this logo go? Or,
Yeah.
trying to even communicating with the factory, even, because I'm probably going to confuse them more than I am clarify anything.
Yeah. It's sort of like, I hear people talking all the time about like, what's your zone of genius, and like focus there, because that's where you can have the most impact. You have limited mental bandwidth, you have limited physical time. So focus on your zone of genius and outsource the rest.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you've been smart about doing that. Okay. So I would love to talk about just general experiences with freelancers, and in some of these stories, you can name names or not name names, depending on maybe it's the example. For people out there listening, you're essentially a one-man show. right? Other than these freelancers and consultants that you might be working with. So from that perspective, I'd love to hear some of the really good things that freelancers are doing, like maybe stuff that's like surprising and delighting you, or like just maybe simple things that are like making your life so much easier that someone might not really think about, right? Those little nuances. And then also maybe some things that you're like, oh, this is kind of frustrating, or gosh, it would have been easier if you did this. And again, that's where you've mentioned a lot of the people. So we could be sensitive about maybe some of the negative things, but just like your perspective of hiring and working with these people, what's that experience like?
Yeah. So as you alluded to, I've been lucky in the current folks that I work with to have a great team. And I think one of the common threads amongst all of them, whether they're purely fashion or not, is communication.
Mm,
Um, just little things, keeping me updated. For example, with Crystal, we just do like a 15-minute check-in every week. It's just partially a sanity check. Like, we've got a bunch of things going on. This is not just my only business. I have other things. It's just easier to do that. Or like, with Katie, for instance, on the graphic design, okay, here's when I'm going to have it. Let's say things get delayed. Just tell me. It's not necessarily a big deal. It usually isn't a big deal, but it is when you're expecting to get something and you don't get it. So I'd say over communicate and have a strategy around that, really, from a client side, is extremely helpful to have. I mentioned earlier with Crystal, the education process, showing me tech packs that she had done before, and walking me through, like, here are all the little details. And that was helpful for me in terms of, okay, like, here are all the things that I've got to think about. It's not just, well, I made the collar stand and the placket a pattern, and I put a rhino on the back, right? There's a lot of other things to think about. And again,
Yeah.
this may not be true of every client that every freelancer has. It may be, I know exactly what I want, I just need you to execute it.
Yeah.
But certainly doing that. And then I think if you're the freelancer, think, how am I solving the client's problem, right? Like,
Yeah.
you are,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, you're really a solution provider,
Yeah.
right? So what is the solution? No one necessarily just wants a tech pack. They want to get something made,
Yes.
right? So yeah, I could have the coolest tech packs in the world, and if I can't get it to the factory, or they don't understand it, or I can't, who cares?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
having a great car with no tires.
Yeah.
So understanding that. So for instance, initially I was like, well, maybe I should communicate with the factory or be looped in. Then I realized that is A, not a good use of my time, and B, I'm just going to muddy the water, not make it any clearer. Let
Yeah.
Crystal do that. And
Yeah.
that wasn't her trying to be pushy or say, hey, let me like upsell you on the service. It's just like, I think this would make your life easier. And I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, I 100% agree.
Yeah.
So I think if you figure out what are the pain points for your client, and then offer solutions to them, it's usually never just as simple as like, I just need a tech pack. Or
It's not.
it may be make a pattern, okay, but try to understand, well, what are you going to do with the pattern, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just go further than just doing what's instructed, and kind of think through, what is the end result.
Yeah. Oh no, I was just going to say, I love that so much. I talk a lot about focusing on problem solving, results, benefits, right? It's not just a fashion flat. It's not just a tech pack. It's not just a pattern. Like, what problem are you solving? What benefit is that going to give to the client? How do you make their life easier, right? Just even sometimes something as simple as like peace of mind, knowing that, like, okay, you know what? I trust Crystal. She can do all the factory communication. I'm going to just back out of that. And I have the peace of mind. Like, I can sleep at night and not think, is it getting done right? Or like freaking out, right? Those are really stressful moments. So I appreciate all that. I also really want to emphasize the comment on Crystal bringing you the example tech pack initially and walking you through that. I think there's a lot of freelancers out there who, when they're first getting started, they get very fearful because sometimes this is how the fashion industry can work. People go in for interviews and they're asked to do like trial projects or something, and they do these projects, they don't get the job, and then the brand actually winds up making their designs and they see them in the market like 6 months later. So it can be a little shady, right? So I think people get really sensitive to like, oh gosh, well, I can't show them my amazing proprietary tech pack format because then Ted's just going to take it and he's going to record the video or take screenshots and then he's just going to do it himself. And like, okay, well, you could. Most brand owners and most people are not here to do that.
Correct. Well, and also it's unfortunate that people act that way, but were they ever going to hire you in the first place? And the
I
answer
know.
maybe no. I
Yeah.
think you could be a little bit whimsical with it, right? So it doesn't have to be necessarily a truly real object. I mean, I think we're about to go into the summer of Barbie. Create an
Yeah.
outfit from there, right? It doesn't need to be, everyone's already doing it. So it's not like you're creating
Yeah.
something that's infinitely new, but you can focus on the details or take like one item, right? And you
Yeah.
can showcase all the little bits and pieces without it
Yeah.
being something you're worried about. If they
Somebody's
take it,
stealing. Yeah.
it's, yeah, you're almost basically just showing like, to make that Barbie jacket or whatever, this is what it's
Yeah.
going to take, and here are all the details. So
Yeah. Yeah.
and I will say, you asked about some of the negatives, right? The biggest one that comes to mind for me, and I think it can be really hard, is telling, I'd like to think I'm exciting and charismatic and smart and all these great things, but
Yeah.
telling me like either my expectations are unrealistic, or no, that's really not how. Like, I think you got to have a bit of a backbone with your clients, not to say, well, we'll try to make this work. Like, no, 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 you really need a tech pack. And I think
Mm,
with both of the first two factories I worked with, if I may have been a little bit annoyed, but I would have had a much better outcome from it if they had just said, no, you really need to do it this way to do it right. So yes, it might feel like you just have to get every client and you have to do whatever they ask you to do because the client's always right, which
mm.
I don't always agree with. You're doing them a disservice by kind of halvesy doing it.
Yeah.
And that was probably the hardest part for me. It's not that I'm, I don't value a tech pack. It's just that I didn't even know, like, it seems so simple. Why would I need to do this? And, as a freelancer, they need to say, no, here are really the steps you need to do, and be willing not to take a customer, which again is
Yeah.
probably really hard when you're starting out and you're just
Totally.
get anybody. Like, I don't even care. I don't
Yeah.
even do this kind of drawing, but I'll figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting you bring up almost like the factory in a way. They're a service provider, right? So they're not like a freelancer per se, but at the end of the day, it's the same type of relationship. You're paying them to solve a problem, to do some type of service for you, to deliver some value or benefit. In this case, at the factory, right? It was manufacturing these garments. And they were just like, yeah, let's go full steam ahead. And that leaves a really bad taste in your mouth. So having that backbone, that confidence to stand up to the client and say, actually, no, this is the way we need to do it. And here's why. If we don't do it this way, like painting the scenarios, right? If we don't do it this way, these are the things that can and likely will happen. If we do it this way, like, yeah, maybe it's going to cost a little more money up front because you got to pay for the tech pack, but here's why you need it. Again, that educational component. I imagine you didn't continue working with that factory, yeah?
No, I did
Okay.
not. And then, the other thing too, right, is that one factory was in Mexico, one was in the US. I talked to other people in Asia kind of broadly,
Yeah.
right? But,
Yeah.
so sometimes it's like, well, this, there's a language barrier, right?
Yeah.
And, in the case of the one in Atlanta, I mean, no, that wasn't, I mean, I went there, I sat across the desk and
But
I
still,
showed it, and still it got so side, it wasn't even a little sideways, it was a lot of sideways. And so it's just, having something, a source of truth to go off of. And
yeah.
I think also for these freelancers, document what you're doing and make sure you take good notes. Like, it's
Yeah.
not completely CYA, but it does
Yeah.
help.
Yeah.
God forbid a relationship goes sour or someone's not quite as happy with it. Well, here's the input that I heard from you. Did I not understand you? Right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can kind of triage that versus, well, no, I thought you said that, and then it becomes a defensive, verbal battle that nobody wins.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like that was some of what happened with the factory in Atlanta. Yeah. It's
Perhaps.
painful, perhaps, perhaps. We're not pointing fingers. So that's interesting. I mean, I'm still kind of stuck on the whole placket thing because, like, that's just so fundamental for like men's versus women's. And like, as soon as like a guy or a girl puts something on, like, you wouldn't even like think of it initially, but you feel it. You're like, wait, this feels weird. Like, why does this feel backwards? Like doing a zipper or a buttons, like the placket, right? On the opposite directionality. So talk a little bit about like, okay, so that's interesting, right? You're first like, oh, well, there's no language barrier and they're local. Like that sounds like it's going to be great. And that's not always everything that you need. So on that same sort of vein, Crystal lives in Dallas. You live in Atlanta.
Mhm.
Talk a little bit about that remote. Like, is she, and is the pattern maker also in Dallas that's
Mhm.
working with you guys? Okay.
Yes.
And so all the fittings and everything is like kind of happening over there and maybe jointly, but I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about the process because people really get a little hung up when in fashion, there's such a tangible component. It's not like building a website. about like the logistics of working remote and how that works for the freelancer as well as the brand? Like, what does that whole scenario look like?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'm a little bit lucky in that I deliberately, not just out of necessity, go to visit Crystal. My brother happens to also live in Dallas, so it's kind of
Okay.
a two for one combo. But let's just
Yeah.
pretend that he's not there for a
Sure,
second.
sure. Okay.
There's definitely parts, a lot of it we can do remotely
Yeah.
and get on a Zoom, and it's normal, it's easy, it makes sense. To your point, like the fittings and stuff, we did one virtual fitting. It sort of works, but it's just really hard, right? It's hard to get dimension and scale, and as the video flipped, or there's just different variables of that get introduced, and you can't really see like how was that shirt pulling, or is the sleeve really the right length and measuring. So I think being willing to meet in person, whether that's the client comes to you, you go to the client, is important. It doesn't have to happen all the time. Like, I don't think most of the time you need to be in the same place as them, but there are times when it absolutely matters. And there's some stuff where, with fabric, it'll get sent to Crystal, she'll check it out and be like, and then send on the ones to me that she thinks I should go check out.
Okay.
I don't need to fly out and go necessarily
Yeah.
feel fabrics, but when it's like when it's a sample, right, that's a whole different ball game. The other way to get around that, right? So again, if it's all about me at the end of the day, bless my heart, I'm sampling off of myself, which is probably a dangerous, not good
I was going to
business
ask if
practice.
you're the fit model. Okay.
Yeah. Which is great when
But
the
I
weight
know
goes up
like
and
part
down.
of your whole thing is like building these clothes for men of like a certain build.
Yeah, it's just, it doesn't matter whether you're small, big, wide, or tall, trying to make things that are, I guess, just more inclusive. It's a little bit easier for guys, I feel like, just from a body shape standpoint.
Yeah.
But one thing that I could, let's just say that Crystal was in Bangkok, I don't know, just to make up somewhere, right?
Sure. Yeah.
The other thing you could do is there are fit models, and you can hire them in that city. And then me as the brand owner doesn't need to be there. So I think from a freelancer standpoint, have other resources available. Again, you're solving the problem. My problem is I am not in Dallas. Okay, so what are the ways to change that? Either I fly to Dallas, or you find a fit model in Dallas for whatever sizes I'm going to make.
Yeah.
And then, hey, I can do the Zoom. Since I'm not doing the tech packet, I'm not trying to check and make sure that this is within a 1/4 inch spec of my tolerance. I don't even know exactly where to measure.
You know your terms.
Yeah, well, I know just enough to be dangerous. Don't let me fool anybody listening.
Yeah.
It's less important. So there's, that's a way where, again, you can solve a problem that it may not be obvious, but hey, go find a fit model. We don't need you to come out here. It doesn't mean that I wouldn't ever want to go out there, but that's another way to solve it, if that's the case.
I always talk about too, because people get really hung up on like the technical design component, doing that remotely. And so like you said, so like the fabric swatches, which is not necessarily a technical component, but like she'll send on to you what you can look at, or you've gone to Dallas, but another option, it really just kind of depends on the client at the end of the day, is just having the factory cut and sew 2 samples and send one to each, right? So at least you're kind of like, all right, we're looking at the same thing. We might not be in the same room, and you put it on your body and she puts it on a fit model body out there. And obviously your bodies are going to be different, but in a way it's almost like, okay, great. Well, now we're fitting it on like 2 different bodies to see how this works. And you, the client, are having the peace of mind that you're like, okay, I'm seeing this in real life. It feels good, not just on the Zoom, and it's reverse and stuff. So that's an easy way to get around it, right? I always say like, it's a little extra sampling costs, but like, if you can't absorb that as a brand, then
maybe different issues.
Maybe bigger issues.
Right. Well, and that's a good point too. Whenever I go sample stuff, I try to do at least 2. So I do one for me. So traditionally people will call it XX. I don't like size labels, so a rhino is XX in my terminology.
I love you guys did that. That's really fun.
Yeah, and so a rabbit is medium, starfish is small, so on and so forth. And
that's
so I
fun.
usually do a rhino and a rabbit, and so then I have someone else who's that medium size. Okay, so they can go try it and see that. Just because sometimes it's not just like, it's one thing to get the size right for you, but then you got to grade the stuff.
You had to make sure. Yeah, totally. If you're doing it, once you're like ready to go into production, you got to do a whole size run and make sure it gets smaller and larger accordingly. So I always say like, people don't get taller just because they get wider. Like you don't just like globally like enlarge the whole thing.
No.
Yeah. Okay, so you guys have totally made it work and you've gone out there to visit her, which is great, and meet the pattern maker. So that's fantastic. Any like last closing tips or advice or ideas or strategies you could share with people out there who are interested in working with brands like yours? A lot of people in freelancing are really all about like the small independent startup, like getting these really cool grassroots ideas off the ground. What else might you offer them?
Let's think. I mean, I don't think I've been wildly helpful on the, how do you go and find your client? But like I said, I think sure you can go out like on Instagram and follow a brand that you might like, and you can offer up your services, or you can post, hey, here are things that I'm designing or working on. It's kind of a way to entice people.
Yeah.
But I guess I'd go back to what I said earlier, think of yourself as a solution provider, right? Usually what is the end goal? I want to make a product and I want to make it successfully. And some of that's also too, like Crystal's been very helpful with, what price point do I really need to hit? Like if I'm going to retail it at this, where do I need to get it, delivered, duty paid, in order for that to even make sense, and what's even possible. And so I wouldn't, as a freelancer, I wouldn't be afraid. I wouldn't assume that your client knows everything, and just say, hey, I would suggest this to you. You may already have in your head this, and just be willing to justify it. And hey, I may overrule you, I may not, but I may not think about it. And then for someone else, just ask questions. If they've been in the industry, they give you kind of a bullet point of here's what we want. Just confirm, okay, what's the price point? What are you doing? And maybe, hey, have you thought about this? To add value. Because again, you don't want to ever be a commodity. And a tech pack can certainly seem like it in some
Sure,
ways,
it can, for sure.
but a tech pack is as much about, I guess, translating ideas and vision into reality as anything else, beyond just simply measurements. And it's this kind of cotton poly blend, or whatever the case may be. So yeah, it's a very interesting, exciting world. I enjoy working with freelancers. Just, it's fun to get to know the people, right? It's not just some big company, it's more real. And one other thing, and that I've done with Crystal before, my background is sales and business, and Crystal was really great at the fashion stuff, but she doesn't have as much of the business background. So at times we've actually said, listen, why don't we just swap hours for hours? We basically barter. At times, like, hey, I can help you with your business, because again, who knows what your client might be able to help you with, right? We all have our blind spots, and if you don't, you're just naive, so how can you help each other? And I wouldn't be afraid to ask people that, particularly if they're a smaller brand and they're doing a lot of this themselves. Budgets are, this is not Ralph Lauren with $20 million ad budget, right? Sexy Ted's ad budget is just a little bit smaller than that, right? So how do I maximize? How do I trade? Okay, hey, listen, can you work a deal, and then I'll make these shirts for, say, the web design company, right? Be creative and offer solutions. Trading hours isn't going to pay childcare bills. I get that.
No, right.
But you can use it at times to enhance the value for both parties.
Totally. If you can't share, that's fine, but I would be really curious, like what sort of, is it like business tips around growing her freelance business and that sort of thing? Like consulting on that level, and if you're not comfortable sharing, that's fine too.
No, not at all. Well, I came to Crystal having a need, right? And then I discovered she's like the greatest person I've met in a long time. Like, and full of energy and just awesomeness. Like, she's literally she's like Tigger. She just is like exuding energy, and you just like want to talk. You feel better talking to her. So, but I also, I have a business. I just can't shut it off, and so. When I went out to Dallas and like met with her for a day, and then I started talking, well, what do you do with other clients? And she's like, well, I'm doing this and that, and she was trying to figure it out. I said, well, hey, listen, like, I like thinking about like, what's the business model and how do you structure it? And like, how do you show your value, which she has tons of.
Yeah, massive. Yeah.
But it's just, just as I like, yes, I have a master's in finance. I know how to use Excel, and most tech packs we set out to are in Excel. Does that mean I can do a tech pack? No, of course not. Right.
Does that mean fashion designers can balance a budget? Maybe not.
Maybe, you never know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But for Crystal, it was more, I think it's really hard when you're by yourself. And this is true for me, it's true for Crystal, it's
Yeah.
true for a lot of people, that like you get so focused on your own little thing. Just having someone else to, if
Mm-hmm.
nothing else, share in the misery of like being a solo entrepreneur or a small business, right? And two, they're just going to see it differently because they aren't you, right? And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's helpful. And so that's where it was like, hey, why don't I help you talk through your business problems? Because not problems, but like, how do you keep growing and doing this awesome
Mm-hmm.
thing
Mm-hmm.
where, you know, I also understand it because I am your client and I can see the
Mm-hmm.
value, but I can also
Mm-hmm.
help you figure out, how do you want to grow and how do you want to scale, and, what do you want to do? What do you want to be when you grow up, kind of thing.
Yeah. I love that. So I love these unstructured conversations because we never know. I mean, I never in my head would have thought, oh, well, and then how are you consulting her? But it's so true, right? Like everybody has their own expertise, their own experience, their own perspective and value to offer. And again, sometimes it is just like seeing it from the outside. We can get, especially, working independently, as many freelancers do, we're in vacuums and it's hard to see the forest for the trees. Or is that the saying? I think that would kind of be the right.
That's absolutely it. And just, make sure you have a network of people to balance yourself out.
Yeah.
Even the woman, Katie, she lives here in Atlanta. We go catch up for lunch. She does work for me. We're also just friends. It's just good to hear,
Yeah.
hey, how are you doing? Like,
Yeah.
even if we have nothing that's going on. And
Yeah.
so, keep your mental sanity, because it's very valuable. And once you lose it, it's
Yeah.
hard to get it back.
Yeah, for sure.
And just, keep people around you, because it's easy to get just sucked into your own little world and grinding away and not looking up and
Yeah.
talking to people. So
Yeah. And you just have you get your blinders on. You have no idea what you're missing. I love it.
yeah.
All right. Well, dear listener, go follow Sexy Ted, sexyted.com, right? That's where everyone can
Yep.
connect with you. Okay. And then I'll end the interview with the question I ask everybody at the end. No pressure. But what is one thing people never ask you about working in the fashion industry, which now you do, that you wish they would?
Ooh, that is a good question. They don't ask me. I think you might have stumped me here. I don't know. I mean, I get a lot of, when I say that I'm a fashion designer, people first of all kind of look at me sideways and say, "Did I mishear you? It's really loud in here." Um, you
Yes,
know,
I'm
I
a fashion designer. I'm Sexy Ted. And they're like,
right,
wait, I got to talk to this guy. He's interesting.
right. I'd say it's less what they don't ask and just more. I enjoy explaining to them, like, kind of all the different little steps that it takes to get from an idea to a tech
Yeah.
pack to the factory to shipping it over to dealing with customs and multiple vendors and
Yeah.
understanding different areas, and how it's really, I don't think as a consumer people appreciate
Mm-mm.
how much goes into the supply chain
Mm-hmm.
of making anything,
Yeah.
let alone clothes. And
Yeah.
so, I enjoy explaining that. And I guess people don't ask as much. They usually ask, where do you make stuff? Or,
Sure.
have you thought about trying to make it in the US? Yes, I have,
Yeah.
and it's not to say that it couldn't work. Also, my scale is just really small. And maybe I can bring it back on shore when I'm bigger, but that's just
Yeah.
not a reality right now. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd say I enjoy talking about that whole, like, it's kind of amazing that we can actually get the stuff done. Like, a small
Yeah.
person can go and get 100 run shirt, of polos made in India and
Yeah.
shipped across the world and
Yeah.
into a, online store or country club near you. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely one of my angles with the whole industry. And I always kind of reword the question because people do get stuck on it, but I like it because it solicits good answers. But if you're sitting down to have drinks or coffee with somebody, like what would you love to share with them about working in the fashion industry that maybe they don't ever ask? And so that was kind of what it was, right? Like the nuances and the logistics of like, how do you actually get from this idea or napkin sketch, right, to like this garment? And it's not like nobody ever thinks about the every teeny tiny step and all the hands that are involved. It's a lot. It's a lot.
it's a lot. And then you got to make a whole business case around it. That's just
Yeah.
after you get it manufactured.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought this was supposed to be fun and easy, right?
If it weren't a challenge, would it really be that fun?
Mm. I'm willing to try it at least once to see and then answer that question.
All right. Well, it was lovely chatting and getting to know you, Ted. Thank you so much for all the insights you shared with the listeners. And I'm excited to watch you and Sexy Ted, your business grow.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
If you liked this video, you're going to love this one. Hit play now, and thanks for watching.